everyone. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us for today's June Plain meeting. I'm Janelle Thalls with DigitalGov University. Now I'll go ahead and give a little bit of background about our presenter. Katherine Spivey serves as the General Services Administration's Plain Language Launcher, where she coordinates GSA's Plain Language program. Katherine is also the chair of the Plain Language Action and Information Network, otherwise known as Plain, as well as a trainer, and she teaches plain language courses for DigitalGov University and numerous other federal agencies. In 2015, she was the Next Gen Public Service Award finalist for exemplary leadership in her plain language work. So now I'll go ahead and hand it over to Katherine. Katherine?
Thanks so much, Janelle. This is sort of a departure from our usual plain language training where we focus on different aspects or explaining the basics or things like this. But, I've been thinking for some time that so many people I talk to, I tell them I do plain language and they say, oh, I wish you would come to my office and write our stuff. And, sometimes that's very complimentary and sometimes not. But, I was thinking that so many people come to plain language or the issue of plain language and communications from a position of what they perceive as very little power. And, like I only get this when it's been approved and I can't make any changes, or I'm only supposed to fix typos, or, whatever it is. And so I've been thinking for a couple of years that really, we don't get plain language right out of the box first draft every time. My first drafts look as bad as anyone else's drafts. But there is a spectrum. We're seeing a lot more sort of ranges on things lately. And, I was trying to figure out how can you move into plain language if you're not feeling, 100% secure, you haven't done a lot of it, but you're interested in it, you think it's important. How can you move forward on that? And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, the steps that you can take on the plain language spectrum. So one of the questions that always comes up, of course, is what is plain language? Because, there's a variety of ideas about it. But essentially, plain language is communication that your audience can find, understand the first time they hear or read it, and use what they found to meet their needs. So there's, the three elements there. And just to clarify, as I often say, we use a couple of different terms for this. There's plain language, plain writing, plain communication, clear communication. There's a number of different terms. I can really only address plain English because that's the language I know, but there are other efforts around the world for plain and indeed clear communications in all of those. So just so you know that, just because I say plain language doesn't mean it's not plain writing or plain English. All those terms should apply. But these are the three. Your audience has to be able to find information. They have to be able to understand it the first time they hear or read it. And they have to be able to use what they found to meet their needs. So there's those three elements. All of those three have to apply for it to be plain. So, who wants to read this? Generally in an in-person class, I say, raise your hand when you stop reading, and some people just cover their eyes immediately when they see this. But, it's junky, it's hard to discern, it's really hard to find out what you're supposed to do. However, how many of you have gotten that kind of information? You get something, it's a big wall of words, it's several large paragraphs, there's no headers, there's nothing to break it up, there's nothing to do with white space or blank space as designers call it. But sometimes you get that content, and speaking as a person who's received content like that, sometimes you have the ability to make changes and sometimes you don't. And one of the first steps you can do, what are the first steps you can do, the baby steps along what I like to think of as wholesale editing and, making everything plain language. But the baby steps for that are first, not editing at all. Now, this is a huge thing because people are so used to thinking about editing on a sentence level, and there's a huge part of that that's important. That, if you've seen plain language training before, you know that goes into it. But the baby steps are breaking it up, put in headers, because you can go back to the original person and say, I didn't edit any of your words. Sometimes that's what they want to hear. I didn't change your language. I just added some headers where I thought they were appropriate so that people would know, they would know what to expect as they were reading a particular section. So that's a baby step. Sometimes it can be introduction, overview, key steps, whatever, definition. Sometimes that can be a very important thing. But people do read, for what they need, and any guidepost you can offer to see how can people get fastest to the information they want. So sometimes you can add a header. That's a good baby step of adding a header. It just helps people get to the information they need. And again, you're not changing words. Another element is formatting and white space. And one of the things that this does is it breaks up paragraphs. Now, on the left of this is 2 paragraphs from a draft blog. Starts IT services team, and then the next one is we measure our success. So there's a lot of plain language already. There's pronouns, there's heavy emphasis on verbs, all of those things. But the baby steps were adding the header, the title, and then breaking that long first paragraph into a bulleted list. No editing from that. That's just moving that and opening it up. It's going to be a lot easier to follow. It's actually very difficult to read across, particularly electronically and even in paper, unless you're using a ruler. It's very easy to slip a line and get confused. So this sort of formatting will help break it up and make people read what you consider important. And generally, people's eyes go to bulleted lists. That's something they're always looking for. And that second paragraph, if you look on the left, that's been broken into 2. We measure our success. Customer and industry feedback is an important tool. Listening allows us. Those are 3 key concepts that all work together for the paragraph. And then the end is, a summary word. So, and whether it's an IT Schedule 70 solution, a GWAC, or another IT, we have the right solution. So you've packaged it in a way that will encourage people to read it. But there's been no editing. This is just formatting. So even if you get a giant paragraph and all you're able to do is to break things into 1, 2, 3 paragraphs, that's still a significant step forward. And sometimes it is very difficult to go back to your boss. I've been in that position where my boss brought me something and said, this needs to go up on the web. It's been approved by everybody and the lawyers, as if that made it particularly excellent. And I looked at it and I thought, this is going to be really, really hard to follow. But to go and say, look, these paragraphs were a little long for web writing. I broke them up. I didn't change any words. As I said, sometimes they just want to hear, I didn't change your words. Sometimes that's just what they want to hear, but it's a huge benefit to the reader to have it broken up. So this is just a reminder for breaking up paragraphs and sentences. Make them easier. I was just working on some material the other day where all of the sentences were just enormous. They were just, 5, 6, 7 lines long, and I was losing what the sentence was trying to convey. And so where I saw a natural stopping point for a sentence is where I stopped it, and then I started the sentence again. take pity on your reader. You know, your reader is not your enemy. You really do want your reader to understand what you're conveying and not get lost and not have to reread sentences and paragraphs. These are easy steps to do. Another thing is to introduce pronouns. Now, this can sometimes be a very hard sell, particularly in the government. But, you know, you can say, look, we're just trying to reach out to people and to convey what it is they need to know or what they need to do and what we do for them. So you might as well make that relationship explicit. Now, this is, you know, still a baby step. And it's a little bit more than formatting because you are changing the words. But as long as you've updated the pronouns consistently and there's no confusion there, you can just say, you know, we're trying to make it easier for people to follow what we're saying. You know, they know that if I'm writing something from GSA, I can say we or our team or us, and that they are you or your agency and things like that. People are beginning to expect this in web writing, and if you insist upon referring to yourself in the third person, they see that as off-putting and standoffish. So this is another baby step. Another big one, and this is, you know, this is moving into changing words and editing, but it is still a useful thing to be able to do, is to change inappropriately passive voice to active, or at least to raise the question, because sometimes, I mean, that's what passive voice does. It leaves the actor unknown. And one of the biggest examples of that in government writing is, of course, the sentence, mistakes were made. It very carefully does not explain who made the mistake. However, you know, people are very quick to assign responsibility, and sometimes incorrectly. And I should add also that the passive voice can be completely grammatical when the actor is unknown. However, sometimes it's overused. Just, you know, people get into bad habits and they, you know, write in passive voice, and they're not thinking how their reader's going to take it. And so this is one of the things that you can query. You know, this is something that you go back and you say, did you mean to say this instead? The issue with the Yoda quote, if no mistake you have made, losing you are, a different game you should play. That's amusing when it's one character in a movie or a series of movies. Very fun. If it's everybody at work all the time, your brain is being forced to rework each of the sentences to make sense. You know, English sentences rely on subject, verb, object. Somebody does something. If you invert that order, you're forcing the brain to do more work. Now, do you want your reader to focus on understanding your sentence or using the energy to do what you want them to do after reading that sentence? You know, as I think at the end of the day, brains are only so big. You know. Another thing that you might find useful, and this has gone all over social media, that one of the best ways to tell whether a sentence is passive voice or not is to see if you can add by zombies. For example, mistakes were made by zombies. So you could reconstruct that sentence to read, zombies made mistakes, and that was in passive voice. If you didn't grow up doing sentence diagramming for fun, you know, if this is not the sort of thing that you really enjoy, you can try the adding by zombies to see if it fits your sentence. If it makes sense after that, then it's passive voice. And you should at least query moving it to active. So, messaging from the audience perspective, now that's not really a baby step. That's a huge step because that is the whole point. Remember the definition? Your audience has to be able to find it, understand it the first time, and use it. That is writing from the audience perspective. That is reader-centered organization, however you want to phrase that. And that is the main step. That's sort of beyond baby steps. But all of your steps are leading up to that. And that's where you're able to read it as if it were your reader, and to go back and to push back and say, I'm not sure this makes sense. This really seems to imply that they should do this, and I thought you had said they were supposed to do that. I mean, you are standing up for your reader. You're standing up for your audience here to say, I'm not sure this is the message we want to put out. This takes guts. This takes, an element of risk taking. I've never said this was particularly easy. But you really do have to say, is this a message that our audience will understand? And if you're not caring about that, then you really have no business sending it out. If you want them to do something. And generally that's what happens. We do in transactional writing. Sign up for this, make sure you've done that, reboot your computer, whatever the instructions you're giving, it has a point. No one sits in a room turning straw into gold just for fun. We always have a purpose for our writing. So these steps, that is the things like white space, formatting, pronouns, active voice, are things to make it easier for your audience to find out what you want. But the culmination of that is when you're writing for your audience, and to make it easier for them to do whatever it is you want them to do. So, until we get new keyboards and new capabilities, and I'm sure Justin Herman is working on it as we speak, until we get the capability to turn everything plain with a hit of a button, I'm waiting for that day too. You really have to consider, what does your audience need to know? How can you make it easier for them to read or scan it, and to make it easy to do what it is you need them to do? Remember, they need to be able to find it. So hiding it in page 65 of a 120-page PDF is not making it findable. They have to understand it the first time. How many of you have gotten emails that you've read 6 or 7 times just to figure out, what am I supposed to do with this? And then they have to be able to use what they've learned to meet their needs. People come to websites, people answer emails for reasons. They're not just chatting. So that is really the plain language spectrum. Every step counts, every step that you make toward it. Even if you're doing what you consider very baby steps, that's still making it easier. Janelle, I'm sure we got lots of questions.
We have a couple questions. So the first one is from Carolyn. She asks, on the issue of pronouns, is it preferable to use they, them to maintain a sense of using gender neutral language?
That is tricky. I think that what I would do instead of that is move toward second person, you, to get around that. Simply because that is a little bit more inviting, and then you can, refer to your agency or yourself. You'd be using first person.
Okay.
A very good question.
I think that comes up quite a bit too.
Mm-hmm.
Another question from Jamie asks, comments, thank you for a great presentation. I think sometimes we may overlook the role of formatting in our communication. We get bogged down with the words. Focusing on formatting and other baby steps is a great approach to reach an audience who may feel overwhelmed about plain language. So more of a comment, but.
And I think, thank you very much. I think also that a lot of us are overwhelmed by our inbox. I was teaching and presenting and briefing the last couple of weeks, and I got, generally when I'm joking, I say, how many of you want 20 more emails? And I swear, people shudder. They're like, anything but that. Or 10 more phone calls, and, I feel like I'm going to have to call emergency services because the mere prospect of that. So there's a lot of overwhelming going on. And I was thinking, exactly that there's so much going on, and a lot of plain language happens at the sentence level, but maybe you can at least start there. There's nothing wrong with where you start, as long as you start.
Okay. And you mentioned obviously the formatting example. Are there any other tips for like the first thing you should do to go to make your what you're writing in plain language or more clear, I guess? It can seem overwhelming when you
Yes,
have.
it does seem overwhelming, which is why we do break it into steps, and steps in a process, because if you think about writing and editing, they are sort of, drafting and editing. As I said, my drafts are as messy as anyone's. I've got Post-it notes, I scribble, and then I try and type it, and I realize, no, that's entirely wrong. That's not what I meant to say. And, there's continual going back, but I try very hard not to focus on plain language at the beginning. Sometimes it's difficult, but, I'll find myself writing, or, I'm copying something from something else, and I say, oh, gosh, that's passive voice. And I've been writing around it, moving it around, and like, oh yeah, I gotta fix that. But it's different steps, because your brain can't do everything at once. And so I generally look for, can I fix the acronyms? And that's one pass. Do I have any, bad passive voice, inappropriate passive voice? No, I've got that. How about, oh yeah, there's a bulleted list, better scope that out. Although I will say that I now think in bulleted lists. So, I don't know how this happened. But, just to, again, not make your brain responsible for everything at once, and to distinguish, between, I'll try something like write something and then go get a cup of tea and then come back. And even that little space, even if it's just 5 minutes, at least I'm looking at it with slightly fresher eyes, and I'm not filling in things that I think are there. I'm trying to see what's actually there.
Okay.
That seems like a long-winded answer.
Yeah, no, I mean, those are all tips that are important. And I like that you think in bulleted lists. Question from Greg. He asks, how do you approach this when your editor and or supervisor is the one pushing for passive voice? And I'll kind of add a follow-up question to that. How do you know, get buy-in from senior leadership too? So the
Okay.
first part is, how do you approach this?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because part of that is, you're building trust, you're building also credibility. And one of the things I do is I try to only make helpful suggestions. I don't make things like happy to glad word substitutions unless it's really going to change or improve something. You know, um, the thing about passive voice is, I realize, and it was a hard lesson to learn, not everyone is as interested in grammar and plain language as I am. And so, sometimes, you go up to someone and you say, hey, that thing you wrote, it uses passive voice quite a lot. And they're like, so? And so it helps to say something like, I'm concerned about something in your writing that may be weakening your point and making it less effective. One of the things I totally stopped doing, which was very smart of me, is don't refer to writing as good or bad. It's effective, or it's not quite as effective as we hope. That moves it to really what we're doing, which is transactional writing. Sometimes you get people who write novels in their spare time, and more power to them, but we're not judging the writing as good or bad. We're just saying, I think that if you want people to do something, and this is specifically passive voice, that, the way you're writing it is making it, equivocal. You're not sure who's supposed to be doing what. And specifically, if there's something that people need to do, if you're giving instructions, then you should be using command voice. And to just really break it down and make it clear that you are trying to help them get their writing to do what it needs to do. That you're not saying they're bad people for writing in passive voice, but to say, look, this is where I think it'll be more likely to do what you want. Your mileage may vary, of course.
I think that's a great approach. Good or bad isn't as effective or not effective. I think that's really helpful.
If you say good or bad, people focus on that and they don't listen to the suggestion. So yeah, effective or not effective, as we'd hope it would be. Of course, there's also the thing, and this is sort of a drawback, is I always feel that any writing could be improved. I go back and look at stuff I've written, I'm like, oh my heavens, why didn't I do that? And you just have to let that go.
So we don't have any more attendee questions. We'll give people a couple more minutes to type your questions in the chat box, but you provided your email, so we can send the email out along with the evaluation survey.
And the deck, if they like to have that.
Okay, great. So we'll send the slide deck.
Yeah.
And then also send everyone the link to the recording when it's available.
Absolutely.
A question, are there any resources that you recommend other than trainings like this or plain trainings or anything that you find is helpful if let's say I wanted to brush up or get practice?
Well, there is the plain language guidelines on plainlanguage.gov, and that is sort of, if you will, the expanded version with many more examples of all the plain language guidelines, and that's a very handy resource. There's also a variety of people on social media talking about plain language. But one of the things that I have found the most helpful is really, and this is how I do my email. When I get an email, I look at it, I say, am I supposed to get this, or does this get deleted, or is this just a calendar invite, whatever. And then I look at it and I say, okay, this is a good example, or a good example of plain language, or more often, ineffective writing because of whatever. And I have a whole email folder of examples, so that when people say, I've heard you talk about plain language, I don't have a clear picture, can you show me what you mean? It's helpful to be able to say, okay, this is somebody else's email, it's not the person who's asking, and it's not something that I wrote, but here's where it, to my mind, veered off course or became confusing. And you look at it and you say, okay, here's some of the things that we could do. Here's an email that's all one paragraph. That's really hard to follow. And people say, oh yeah, I've seen those. I get those in my email. And so you're trying to build commonality. Or you say, this sentence, I just didn't get it. I wasn't sure if someone just started typing randomly, which Lord knows that can happen. But just to say, here are some examples from everywhere, all the emails I ever get. They may possibly be, okay, if I say any of the emails you ever send me may end up in my example file, that will now stop a lot of people from emailing me, which is not my goal. But it's just really helpful when you're looking at material to say, what would I do? And I know we don't have a lot of time for experimentation and testing, but sometimes it's easy to have, or sometimes it's possible to have two versions and to show them to someone and say, I've done web content before where I've said, okay, this is what you sent me, and this is what I turned it into using pronouns, shortening sentences, highlighting the benefit to the customer, or to the user, moving the content around. Because what gets me a lot, and this is a lot of years in the web field, is people like to give history of offices. And I don't think anyone cares. It's really what you do. It's not, we were formed in 1999 and we have a charter. You can see the charter, you can read people that really don't care, in comparison with what you can do for them. And that is a very difficult mindset to get into, to make that transfer.
So we have some more questions from the audience, but I will definitely think twice before I send you an email. It's a good reminder.
You already said you were being more careful about emails after the first class. So.
I know. I keep reminding myself, or you keep reminding me. Do you have any advice for balancing a desire for customer-friendly tone with a desire for plainer, less wordy language? For example, please submit your form versus submit your form. Are we more likely to get the desired behavior from the audience if we ask them nicely, even if it costs us words?
Oh, it's not always fewer words. I mean, that's often. I mean, because I was mentally editing when Janelle was reading that out, and I was thinking what I would say is please send us your form. Please send us your application or whatever the phrase would be. I happen to get a little cranky when people use things like, please don't hesitate to contact me at your earliest convenience if you have a question or something like that. And I think that's way too many words. What I mentally change that to is, let me know if you need help. And I think that that's probably the sort of thing that people just sort of in self-defense start glossing over because they know what it means.
Mm-hmm.
Please contact me at your earliest convenience. It's please call me now.
Yeah.
Or call me ASAP. I mean, just in the sense of conveying that urgency. But, it's not always a question of reducing words, but you might see what you're using to expand. You can convey tone with shorter words. You can be absolutely courteous and polite and plain.
Okay. Thanks. This is a comment. When I'm asked to write about something I'm not familiar with, I try a technique similar to your Post-it idea. I put the main idea or point I'm trying to make in the center of a page and then drew lines from that to the main ideas and looked at those, saved some, put some under the main ideas that this person thought were good ones, and it really worked. So it's good to know.
It's a big help also to know what you need to produce good writing. I've gotten to the point where I do a lot of brainstorming on Post-it notes, and they're just scribbles. They could be scribbles, they could be, 2 words, they could be an abbreviation, and then I just move them around. And that's helpful for getting started. I mean, remember the difference between drafting and writing and editing. There are 3 different processes, and you need to use different skill sets. And I find that, honestly, as low tech as it sounds, pencils and Post-it notes free me a great deal. Whiteboards, I don't have that same freedom of expression. But, give me a Post-it note and I'll go to town. But you have to realize what's going to work for you.
Okay, those are some good tips. What do you think is more effective in terms of providing plain language suggestions? Working with your team to make changes together or presenting the team with suggestions and feedback? Do you find sensitivities skew higher for either options? Just interested in your feedback or the best way to approach that.
Well, that's an excellent point, because what I have often found is I end up doing the plain language review, which is not a problem, but I try to convey to everyone that that is a skill that they can pick up as well. That would mean that I could never go on vacation, or be sick. So that would be bad. But, I try to say, I have developed this skill and I am interested in training other people on it. One of the things that I was able to do once when I was reviewing a blog was simply to say, hey, person who wrote the blog, watch how I edit. And honestly, tons of that was, that paragraph is too long. Seriously, I was just stepping back. I wasn't even reading it. I was just sort of looking at the shape of the blog and saying, okay, that needs some space. This can be bullets. This needs to move up to the top. I meant to say earlier when you were asking about editing that often when you write, it's distilling, in the magical thinking and writing process, it's distilling in your brain. And so by the time you've come to the bottom or the end of what you're writing, you've come up with a wonderful introduction, or you've come up with the what I would old-fashionedly call the thesis statement. And one of the most useful things you can do is take that culmination of all of your thoughts and put it up at the top. Now, that is often an easy thing. But sometimes when I'm looking at drafts, what I'll find is that people have 2, 3, 4, 5 introductory paragraphs. Yeah, and you have to sort of stay back and say, okay, you get one. Pick one introductory paragraph. What is the one that conveys what you want right now? But it often takes. I'm not saying it's easy to edit your own work. It's not. Following the plain language tips can help, but it's really best, I think, sometimes at least to show it to someone else. And as I was doing this sort of just reformatting more of the blog, I was saying, okay, this section needs a header because this is where you're talking about a new topic. This section down here moves to a different topic. And I don't think that he'd ever been talked to about headers before. I mean, nothing bad about him. I just said, this is what the shape of the blog should look like. And I know no one can see me, but I am waving my hands around.
She is.
Yeah,
Yes.
I am waving my hands around. So sometimes, getting back to your point of what's the best way to show, it's really helpful to have before and after. It's often very good to get somebody else's, so you're not starting with a team piece. You're just saying, hey, this came out of my magical folder. This is an illustration of how plain language would improve it and make it more effective. It was a 5-minute ninja job for plain language. I had a coworker say, I've got to write this. This needs to go to the senior team. I just don't know how to make this work. And he was starting with too many details. He wasn't giving a focus for the details. So essentially, I said, let me take the Google Doc, and I, copied his last sentence. I moved it to the top. I moved all of his details into bullets, and then I added a few words. And I mean, he looked at me as if it was alchemy, but it was just, this is the point you're trying to convey. These are the details supporting the idea you're trying to convey, and this is sort of a, closing point to that list. So I find that before and after can be the best, really.
Do you have an example of places we could find before and afters, or?
There's some before and after at plainlanguage.gov. That's the website for the Plain Language Action and Information Network. There's some before and after examples on the Center for Plain Language, which is the nonprofit lobbying nonprofit group about plain language, centerforplainlanguage.org. I think what you might also do is look at the section. Some agencies have more beefed up plain language pages than others. If you could look for yours and find out if they have any before and after, that's generally also where the teams are listed. So, one of the things I always recommend, if you want more plain language training, because that comes up periodically, check first with your agency and see if they've arranged anything.
Okay. Can you share a success story of an agency that successfully incorporated plain language into their communication, or how did they do it? Or
when I was looking at creating our implementation plan, I looked at all of the existing plain language pages, and two agencies, surprising to me, had a huge plain language effect. And one of them was the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the other is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I think that's the rest of the name. It's Nuclear Regulatory something, and it has to be along those lines. But they had really like microsites devoted for plain language at their agencies. And when you think about it, those are really complicated. I think agriculture has a big program about, how they're doing that with communication. Offhand, I'm not sure I can think of anything. There is the anecdote. It's not about a federal agency, but a state. Washington State had a piece of communication go out from the Department of Revenue from Washington State that had a 97% ignore rate. And of course, the Department of Revenue is interested in money. And so they redid it with plain language and, more sensible arrangement. And they collected 800,000 more than they had anticipated. So, I mean, that is one example. Joe Kimball has a book out called Writing for Dollars, Writing to Please, that has a section on different federal agencies that have used plain language for different purposes. And of course, that book has a lot of other things, other examples as well. What we're also seeing, and this is, I don't know if you could see a direct financial effect, but there is a big thing, medical literacy, health literacy, of groups dealing with patients or people who have certain conditions, and the whole issue of writing to them in a language that they understand. It's just really taken off in the last couple of years because people, unless they're medical people themselves, they do not necessarily understand the terms. And what they're realizing is that there's a huge gap once they're home, once they're recovering, once they're responsible for their own health care, in the sense of taking medicine or, wound care or things like that. And just the simplest things that the medical people thought were in plain language were not.
Interesting. All right, we have another question. Did the legal staff or I guess IG's office, Inspector General's office, adopt your plain language principles? Did you?
That's a very good question. I would say that it differs from agency to agency, but over the world, many lawyers are in favor of plain language because it increases compliance and it decreases the amount of time spent on enforcement, and that's in almost every aspect of what the law could apply to. For example, have you ever seen signs? I was just traveling over the weekend and I had to park, and I of course thought, well, this is what the sign says, and I took photos. This is what the sign says. Is this what the sign means to say? Because I think everyone at some point has parked and worried about whether the car would be towed. And that's just sort of, user experience, customer experience. How can you make things work better? I've taught different Office of the Inspector General about plain language principles because, they write reports, they want them read and taken seriously. They don't want them just glossed over. So, we addressed certain elements that might help.
Thank you, Catherine. That's all the questions we have.
All
Did you
right.
have anything else to add, or?
I can't think of anything. I know that I will the instant I shut down on the meeting, the Adobe Connect or GoToWebinar. That's what generally happens. But no, I mean, these are the baby steps. There are more complex things you can do with plain language. As always, you can join the plain language community of practice. You can pursue becoming a trainer if you just can't get enough plain language. One of the things that I have found very useful if you're not quite ready to make the commitment to become a trainer or what have you, is you can gather together like-minded people. You don't have to be doing it all on alone. One of the things I've done before is just held brown bag sessions. It helps if you have candy, but that can just be an added thing. I've had in-person brown bag sessions where I just, talk about an issue like descriptive link language or something like that. And sometimes people come and sometimes they don't. And I've had office hours where I just pretty much say, I'm going to be hanging out in this little conference room. If anyone has a plain language issue, either join the meeting space or stop by or send me an email, and I'm happy to talk about that. And also it helps if you'll be a reader for other people, because a lot of it, it's the audience who determines if something is in plain language. We can give you the techniques, we can explain the principles, we can say, this is, going to lead toward, but it's the audience. As I said, a lot of medical people think that everyone knows what a contusion is. It's not true. People think they know, or they don't want to be embarrassed, or what have you. But if you can just get together a meeting, say that the plain language group is going out for lunch, even if you're just taking yourself, it really does help to get that to get it mentioned. There are some books. Jenny Reddish's book is very good, Letting Go of the Words. Joe Kimball's I already explained, which is more about the financial aspects of it and the examples. And there's a lot in plain language social media. I think that may have sufficiently addressed that. Of course, there's always a lot to say.
Yeah, and actually we had one question that came in while you were talking that other people might be interested in. How can people become trainers?
Okay. The Plain Language Action and Information Network holds a boot camp every year or so, and the process works like this. Well, obviously you make sure your boss is okay with your doing this, and I would check with your team at your agency, just to see if they have anything that they're offering. But the sequence goes like this. You take the boot camp, you observe someone teaching, and this is different from taking a plain language class, because you're looking to see how that person is presenting the information. You're not actually looking to learn the information yourself. So perhaps the best thing is to have taken a class, then you take a boot camp, then you observe someone else. Then the next step is you co-teach with a different veteran trainer. This is to try and expose you to as many different ways of handling a class. Not everyone who comes to plain language is a teacher or trainer of many years experience. Some people are coming to this cold. So you co-teach, and then you teach and are observed by somebody else. And then, along the lines, you get feedback like, here are some good ways of handling this kind of question, or, I would drop this particular section because, until you know it a little bit more. Just some of the feedback on how to have an effective training session. And then we sort of launch you into the air to fly on your own. We anticipate that you will teach at your agency. We also ask that you teach 1 or 2 times a year, because Plain has a number of training requests coming in. I do not know the next time we're offering a boot camp, in case that's a follow-up question.
Yeah, I think that it wasn't a follow-up question, but I'm sure a lot of people have the question.
Yes.
There was one other question about what you mentioned, social media examples. What do you have any recommendations of which types of social media or where people can find out more about plain language?
Well, GovPlainLang is the Twitter handle for the Plain Language Action and Information Group. Plainlanguage.gov is the Facebook group. There's the Center for Plain Language. There's Plain International. If you're in the legal profession, there's also Clarity. I think it's Clarity International, and that is sort of plain language for lawyers and the legal profession. Okay. That's a good place to start, and then of course you'll start seeing people whose social media posts that you like, and then you can follow them, and it just sort of assumes the usual viral progression.
Okay, great. All right, I think that's the end of all the
All
questions
right.
now. But
All
again,
right.
if you think of any other, we'll send Catherine's email in our follow-up email along with the survey. So please take the time to complete this short survey and give us your feedback on today's training and other types of training. Doesn't have to just be plain language, but definitely specifics on types of plain language training you'd want. So thanks again, Catherine, and everyone have a great afternoon.
Thank you.